All right, everybody, and welcome back to the OneClass channel. My name is Kevin, and today I'm going to be teaching economics. A little bit about me. I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics, and I also work as an economist. And today I'm just going to walk you through some common problems in economics, both at a high school and a university level. I'll probably do about 10 problems for the next 45 minutes or so, and what I'll be doing is verifying solutions and providing the background knowledge needed to solve these problems. So first question here is going to read as follows. When can two countries gain from trading two goods? Possible answer A is when the first country can only produce the first good and the second country can only produce the second good. B, when the first country can produce both goods but can only produce the second good at great cost, and the second country can produce both goods but can only produce the first good at great cost. C, when the first country is better at producing both goods and the second country is worse at producing both goods. Or D, when two countries could gain from trading two goods under all of the above conditions. And what our junior tutor has written here is that in international economics, there are two approaches, absolute advantage and comparative advantage. They're used to know whether two countries gain from trading two goods or not. The absolute advantage is a theory which tells that if one country produces more quantity of a particular good with the same resources, then that country has an absolute advantage for producing that particular good. On the other side, the comparative advantage theory states that if the country has a lower opportunity cost of producing a particular good than the other good, then that country has a comparative advantage in producing that particular good. So option A here is showing the absolute advantage theory. Again, option A is when the first country can only produce the first good and the second country can only produce the second good. That would mean that the first country has the absolute advantage for the first good and the second country has the absolute advantage for the second good. And they said that options B and C show the comparative advantage theory. So B being when the first country can produce both goods but can only produce the second good at great cost, meaning they'd have the comparative advantage for the first good. And the second country can produce both goods but can only produce the first good at great cost, meaning they'd have the comparative advantage for the second good. So that leaves D, which is that the two countries could gain from trading two goods under all of the above conditions. I don't have anything to draw right to that one. I think that was a very good explanation. So I will write that in here and continue. Moving on here to question 2. And question 2 reads as follows. Inefficiency exists in an economy when a good is 1, left unconsumed by buyers who value it most highly, 2, being produced such that resources are not optimally utilized, 3, not distributed fairly among the buyers, and 4, not produced as is not valued by the buyers. What our junior tutor has written is that the answer is 1, left unconsumed by buyers who value it most highly. When the production of a good exceeds its consumption such that it is left unconsumed by the buyers in the economy, inefficiency is said to exist. It occurs when there's a surplus in the market representing a deviation from the free market equilibrium. An excess burden, also known as deadweight loss, is created to represent the inefficiency in the market. The market, on the other hand, is considered efficient when all that is produced is consumed without any form of government intervention. Although that is some mainly strong analysis, I don't believe that's the correct answer. I believe that inefficiency exists in an economy when a good is being produced such that resources are not optimally utilized. And what this means, if we draw supply and demand graph here, and of course we can draw quantity on the x-axis and the price on the y-axis. Supply sloping upwards and demand sloping downwards. The economy will be efficient when it is produced at this point here, when it's in equilibrium and supply equals demand. We'll call this P star, and we'll call this Q star. And this is the only point when the economy is in equilibrium and it's efficient. So any other point, say, if we're supplying up here, this would not be efficient, but the quantity demanded would only be down here. As a result, everything in here camera check to make sure you guys can see that. Looks like you can. Oh, you know what? I misread this actually. So their answer is correct. That was 2. The correct answer is 1, like they said, left unconsumed by buyers who value it most highly. So that I'm going to say excellent analysis, strong write-up. And what they were referring to here is actually exactly what I ended up drawing with the excess supply. So this drawing here corresponds with question 1, or answer 1, sorry. 3. And question 3 reads, when studying how some event or policy affects a market, elasticity provides information on the A, equity effects in the market by identifying the winners and losers, B, magnitude of the effect on the market, C, the speed of adjustment of the market in response to the event or policy, participants who are directly affected by the event or policy. And what our junior tutor has written here is that the answer is B, magnitude on the effect of the market, and that is correct. The write-up is as follows. The elasticity of demand essentially describes the numerical, computative, and quantitative demand, income and demand, and related goods price and demand. For example, the amount or extent by which the quantity demanded changes with a change in price, income, and related goods price. It is a measure of the degree of responsiveness of demand for a commodity due to change in its own price, changing the price of related goods, and changing consumer income. The elasticity of demand calculates how the consumer reacts to a certain degree of changes in independent variables like price, income, etc. And although I think that's a perfectly good write-up, I'm just going to give you guys also kind of the general formula as well. So the elasticity of demand, typically denoted like that, I believe it's a Greek letter E or something along those lines, is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. Just so everybody's here, or everybody's clear on what I'm writing here, this percentage sign, this is a little triangle, it's delta, which denotes a change in. QD stands for quantity demanded in price. So here I'm just going to write good answer, correct, and we can move on. Moving on to question 4 here. Question 4 reads as follows. A characteristic of the long run, B, that all inputs can be varied. C, that plant capacity cannot be increased or decreased. Or D, so the correct answer here is both labor and capital are variable. In fact, all factors of production are variable. Therefore, change in the total labor employed is not the only determinant of change in total output or revenue. Accordingly, the demand for a factor in the long run is based on the cost of factors and not simply the marginal productivity of labor. The following are the adjustments that firm can make in the long run and cannot make in the short run. That would be install new plants, equipment, or machinery, or the addition of any new facilities to develop the product. Maybe I would just summarize that really quickly and say that in the long run, factors of production and cost are available. So I'm just going to write all factors of production and costs are available. But in the short run, we see that firms are only able to influence prices through adjustments made to production levels. To shorten that up, I'm just going to write firms influence through production levels. So put alternatively, the only way they can influence prices is to make more or less of their good. do that for a minute in case anybody wants to take a picture or anything, but the correct answer here is good analysis. This answer is correct. Can move on now to question 5 and erase this. Question 5 reads, which of the following markets is most likely to be perfectly competitive? Possible answers are A, the market for mushrooms, B, the market for Three Musketeers candy bars, C, the market for touring motorcycles, and D, the market for Saturday matinees. And here our junior tutor has written, as we know that the markets are mainly divided into 2 types, known as perfectly competitive market and imperfectly competitive market, is a market where a large number of sellers selling homogeneous goods, keyword here is homogeneous, to a large number of buyers at a price level which is defined by the industry. It is the reason that the firms in this market are also known as price seekers. Option B, which reads the market for Three Musketeers candy bars, is not a correct option because it is produced in some of the cities of particular countries. Option C, the market for touring motorcycles, is not a correct option because it is demanded by a particular group of people who want to go on a tour. And option D, which reads the market for Saturday matinees at the movie theater, is not a correct option because the number of buyers and sellers for the tickets on Saturday matinees are comparatively less. Option A is a correct option because there is a large number of buyers and sellers for mushrooms. And that is correct, that the correct answer is A. And just to give you like a better idea of like a perfectly competitive market is like, you could also argue the market for Three Musketeers candy bars is correct here. But the keyword in, as I said earlier, was, and that there's a large number of buyers and sellers. So more people use market for mushrooms, more people use mushrooms on a day-to-day basis than Three Musketeers candy bars, which I believe is why it's the most correct answer here. So I'm going to say good answer and write up. I would just maybe elaborate a bit more on why B is incorrect. Question 6. And question 6 reads, when you buy a blank, you are loaning money to an organization. And possible answers here are 1, a stock, 2, a bond, 3, a mutual fund, and 4, an index fund. And of course, the correct answer here is bond. So a bond is a financial instrument that acts as debt security by providing a written record of indebtedness of the issuer of the bond to the bondholder. The debt is owed by the issuer of the bond period interest payment or repayment of principal upon maturity. Bonds are used by individuals in the economy and firms to raise money for long-term investments and or finance expenditure. And that is the correct answer and exactly what a bond is. Maybe just to elaborate, a stock is a share of a corporation, and then mutual funds and index funds both hold a wide array of both stocks and bonds depending on what they're tracking. So for example, with say like an index fund will track the S&P 500, which tracks the biggest 500 companies in the United States. And it'll be made of very small portions of the stocks of all those biggest 500 companies. So in a way, they're tracking a market as opposed to just a single corporation. Then there are different index funds for specific industries. So you can get funds that follow the mining industry, for example, and things of that nature. This is a bond. Question 7. Probably won't run through all these, but I'll pick and choose a couple, and then we can keep moving forward. So the first one reads, if government tax policy requires Jane to pay 28 grand in taxes on an annual income of 200 grand, and Mary to pay 10 grand in tax on an annual income of 100 grand, then the tax policy is A, regressive, B, progressive, C, proportional, or D, optional. And the correct answer here is going to be A, progressive. This looks like a good write-up here. Our junior tutor said, in order to answer this question, we need to find out the tax rate paid by Jane and Mary. So that Jane pays 28 grand tax on annual income of 200 grand. So the rate of tax for Jane is calculated as 28 grand over 200 grand times 100%. Comes out to 14%. And that's for Jane. Similarly for Mary, she's getting taxed 10K on her income of 100K. Multiply that by 100%, and we see that she's only being taxed at a rate of 10%. So what our junior tutor had to say is that here we could see that Jane earns more than Mary, and the tax rate is more for Jane as compared to Mary. So according to the government tax policy, the tax rate increases with the increase in income of the people. This type of policy is known as progressive, as the higher income people will get hurt just as much by paying higher tax rate as the lower income people get hurt by paying the lower tax rate. Basically what they're trying to say is that a progressive tax rate increases as the taxable amount of your income increases. So for example, if this tax policy was proportional, then we would expect both Mary and Jane to be taxed at the same rate. So seeing that Mary's taxed at 10% and pays tax of 10 grand on an income of 100 grand, now seeing that Jane has twice the income of Mary, if this was proportional, you would expect her to also have twice the tax, and she would only be paying 20 grand in tax. But because we have a progressive tax, as income increases, so does the tax rate, and that's why Jane pays a higher overall tax than Mary does. One last thing I should just touch on is moving into a higher tax bracket is always a good thing. There are people out there that reject promotions because they don't want to move into a higher tax bracket thinking they'll make less. Because the progressive tax rate is only on the income you make above a certain amount when you move to the tax bracket, it is always better to increase your income and be taxed more on the additional income. But I digress. I'll do one more from question 7 here. What do goods like gasoline, tobacco, and alcohol typically share in common? Potential answers are a progressive tax is imposed on each of them. A regressive tax is imposed on each of them. They are all subject to government excise taxes, or they are all subject to government fiscal taxes. And the correct answer here is going to be that they're all subject to excise taxes. And what our junior tutor wrote was that excise taxes are levied on products which are produced on commercial purpose. Here, gasoline, tobacco, and alcohol are all produced to be sold in the market, and so all these products are subject to excise duty imposed by the government. All I would maybe add to that is that there are 2 types of excise duty. So I'll call this bit tax, which is definitely very ambiguous. So I'll call this bit excise. Perfect. So there are 2 types of excise taxes. One is ad valorem. I believe that's an old Latin phrase, as we often use in economics. But ad valorem essentially just means that they are paid percentage or at a rate, taxed at a rate, I should say. Whereas the second kind is specific. And that's where they are instead taxed by unit. So for an example, we know that excise taxes can be imposed on cigarettes. If it was an ad valorem excise tax, maybe the tax would be 10% of the price of a box of cigarettes. But if it was a specific tax, maybe they were taxing them per cigarette. And some of the boxes have different amount of cigarettes in them. Verify solutions, so I'll say solutions to answers 1 and 3 are correct. Did not take up 2 and 4. I think it's just 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right. Moving on now to question 8. Question 8 reads, what does the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, seek to accomplish for developing countries? Possible answers are 1. The IMF establishes industries and technologies in developing countries. 2. The IMF helps the developing country citizens establish bank accounts. 3. The IMF provides economic advice and loans to developing countries. Or 4. That the IMF gives college aid to qualified individuals in developing countries. And our junior tutor has written that the IMF provides economic advice and loans to developing countries, which is correct. And how they've explained this is that the International Monetary Fund is an organization comprising of 189 member countries working collectively to establish global monetary cooperation, ensure financial stability, high employment, smooth international trade, encourage sustainable economic growth, and alleviate global poverty. It acts as an advisory council for governments of various economies and supports them in their pursuit of economic growth by prescribing the best government policy, providing short-term capital, and protecting them from financial meltdowns. The IMF provides economic policy advice and finances to the developing nations in order to help them in their macroeconomic objectives of poverty reduction and financial stability. And that reads like it's pretty well taken off the IMF page. I really don't have anything to add to that one. I think that's a very good answer. On to question 9. I think this might be the last question here, but if I remember correctly, there's quite a few parts to it. So the first part here reads, a productions possibilities frontier shows the A, maximum attainable combination of 2 goods that can be produced with the available resources. B, the combination of 2 goods that consumers desire most. C, the maximum output of 2 goods that can be produced with an unlimited quantity of resources. Or D, the demand for goods. And what our junior tutor has written here is that a production possibility frontier is a curve that gives a combination of goods or service which can be reproduced by using the available scarce or limited resources. Therefore, the correct option is A. I'm just gonna take the time to draw a PPF here for you guys. So this is like quantity of whatever your first good is. We could say apples. That's your x-axis, and your y-axis is going to be whatever your second good is. We can say bananas. And this production possibility frontier is always going to be bowed outwards. It is horrifically drawn, but it's always going to be bowed outwards, and it's going to show the combination of goods and services that are completely attainable. So basically, there's kind of like 3 points of note on a PPF. We'll call this A and B. We'll call these points C and D. And we'll call this point E. And basically, A and B are going to be the Pareto efficient points on your PPF. Pareto efficient, by the way, just means something is Pareto efficient when you cannot make somebody better off, but without making someone else worse off. So for example, here, you can't get more apples unless you were to take less bananas. And basically every point along the productions possibility frontier is where you, the consumer, are indifferent between the amount of apples and the amount of bananas you have. So for example, here you may be perfectly happy to have 12 apples, but 0 bananas. You are equally to have, say, 6 apples and 6 bananas. I should maybe draw these lines. So this would be, we'll call that 12, call it 8, 4, and 0. And we'll call this, I don't know, 16. That's probably the wrong multiple to go with, but whatever, 16 and 8. So for example, here, at this point, you would be perfectly happy to have 12 apples and no bananas, whereas here, you would be equally as happy to have 8 apples and, say, 12 bananas. That's at this point here. And this point here, you would be as equally happy as the last two to have 16 bananas and no apples. So again, points A and B here are the Pareto-efficient points where you cannot have one more apple without giving up at least some of a banana, and vice versa. Points C and D, which are inside the production's possibility frontier, are points that are attainable, which, of course, if you can have, say, 8 apples and 12 bananas, you can definitely achieve point C here, where you only have 4 apples and 8 bananas, because you can have more at point A without having to give anything up. So this, point C and D, are attainable, but they're inefficient. Really hope you guys can read this because I'm wrecking the hell out of this word. And point E, which is outside of the production possibility frontier, is unattainable. So due to a scarce number of resources, we can't achieve any more quantity than what's on the production's possibility frontier. So point E here, for example, might be like, I don't know, 10 apples and 15 bananas, but we can't achieve that. If we wanted to have 15 bananas, the most apples we could have, it would be the point where it crosses the production possibility frontier, right there. The most apples we could have is maybe like 5 or whatever down here. That was a very long, blown out discussion on 113, so we'll move a bit forward. But this essentially explains the entire concept of a production possibility frontier. I'm going to erase some of the lines just so we can better see. It's too many lines. Just so we can better see the points in the write-ups. So next question in the set here. Being on the production possibilities frontier implies that more of what one good can produce only by A, decreasing the quantity of the other good produced, B, increasing the quantity of the other good produced, C, lowering the price of the good, D, raising the price of the good, or E, none of the above. So what this comes back to is what we talked about earlier, which was the Pareto efficiency bit. So if you're, and you want more of one good, we know that means you'll have to have less of the other good. What our junior tutor has written here is that as the available resources are scarce and fixed for producing the two goods, we have to move the resources utilized for producing one goods towards the production of other goods. Therefore, in the PPF curve, if we want more of one good, we have to decrease the quantity of the other good. Therefore, the correct option is A, and that's the correct answer. I'm probably not going to go through all of these because I feel like I explained the major concept already, but 116, an output combination is technically efficient if A, it is possible to produce more of all goods, B, it is possible to produce more of one good without producing less of another, C, it is not possible to produce more of one good without producing less of another, or D, it is not possible to produce more of any good at one cost. And what our junior tutor has written here is that the correct answer is A, it is possible to produce more of all goods. So on the PPF curve, Every point or combination is technically efficient to give a maximum output combination by utilizing a given set of resources. Therefore, technically speaking, the point of combination in PPF gives the maximum possible output of both the goods. For instance, a point in a PPF may give 5 of X and 10 of Y, and point B can give 10 of X and 5 of Y. However, both give the maximum possible output of X or Y with the available scarce resources. I think they've written the correct answer, the incorrect answer, but had the correct write-up. So technically efficient is synonymous here with Pareto efficient, where it's any point along the line, which would mean that the correct answer would be, it would not be possible to produce more of one good, though producing less of another. So I believe that the correct answer is C here. But their write-up was correct in where they said, therefore, technically speaking, the point of combination of the PPF gives the maximum possible output of both the goods. So I'm going to wrap that up here because I feel like let me look through the rest actually. So 117 speaks to what we've already said. Suppose in an economy, some resources are not utilized in their most productive use. If society decides that it wants more of one good, A, will have to increase the quantity of resources in the economy. B, will have to give up production and consumption of some other good. C, it can only do so if technology advances. Or D, it can achieve this without giving up another good by employing the underutilized resources. Here we've written if some resources are not optimally utilized, then the production or output combination point will be inside the PPF curve. Therefore, to increase the production of one good, we can simply do it by optimum utilization of the underutilized resource. This just pushes the output combination rightwards in the PPF curve, and thus newly attained point gives more of a good without sacrificing the other good. So what this is alluding to here is moving from, say, D out to B, where we simply weren't utilizing all of our resources. So for example, D was already attainable, say 8 apples and maybe 6 bananas, but we already know at the technically efficient or Pareto efficient point, B, that we could achieve 10 apples and say 9 bananas. So we weren't consuming as much as we could have, and we didn't need to change anything to consume more. I'm going to leave it right there because I think all the questions more or less allude to the same thing. So say, good answer for 116. All right. And on that note, those are all the questions for today. If you enjoyed today's question and answer and would like to be notified of when we do this next, you can hit the subscribe button and the notification bell below. If you'd like to submit your own questions, visit the links in the description, and remember to leave a like, comment, or whatever else to share this video with your friends. This has been Kevin from OneClass. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving,